Hello, this is Will Faerber from Art to Ride, and today we're looking at a first submission by Mary of her horse Moon. Moon is a 13-year-old Nakota Indian horse that basically has no training. And so she's starting with them. Now start with here, what we're seeing is you're trying to work in hand, but you're trying to do a turn on the haunches, and it would be the other way around that we'd want to do in the beginning. That is more of a turn on the forehand, or moving in just a simple shoulder in or leg yield. So the way you're going about this, trying to make him turn around his hindquarters, is much too difficult for the horse at this level, and would be something we do with a much more advanced horse. So once again, you see what I'm talking about here is you're making him turn around his hindquarters there a little bit. So go back and watch my videos on work in hand. This is a good attempt to get started, but we need to just work with a simple leg yield, for instance, from the center line to the outside, instead of what you're trying to do, which is make him do a turn around his haunches, which is way too difficult for him at this stage. So go back and watch those videos on work in hand again and see if you can't get a better idea about doing that. Once again, we want to move the horse more in a leg yield, so you're moving him around the forehand rather than trying to make him do a turn on the haunches, which is what you were getting there. Now this is a very interesting horse, and it's going to be really interesting and fun to watch this one develop because he's so undeveloped at the moment. This horse, she said, has not done much in his life. He's had some early training that went badly, and so she's retraining the horse and starting all over again. And that's just what you need to do. Now her question was, does this horse have some kind of different gait that makes it so that she says the horse is very easy to sit to, but yet very difficult to rise the trot. So what that should immediately tell you is there's no thrust through the horse's back, and that's also why he's so easy to sit to the trot, because you're not even really in a trot. You're really in a jog once we get to that point. So the main thing here then is to get this horse moving actively enough to start swinging under and working through his back, which you're certainly on the right track to, but not quite achieving yet, but you will if you keep up. So I'd like to see you do lunging here. See how you're stepping on that line. You always want to get that line rolled up in your left hand, you know, in big loops so that it's not on the ground. It's very easy to get a line wrapped around your leg with the horse suddenly to bolt off or something. And don't kid yourself, the calmest horse in the world, if one of those trees falls down or something like that, will spook. There's not a horse in the world that won't spook at something. So we want to be very careful that those lines aren't somewhere around our leg where it can get trapped around our leg and we could end up getting drugged, which is something you never want to experience. I experienced that once as a young man when a horse fell over with me and then jumped right back up and took off with my leg through the stirrup. So I can tell you that is not something you want to experience. And having had that happen once and not get hurt, I've become very cautious about it after the fact. So once again, get that line wrapped up in your hand so it's not wrapping around your leg. Now once again, to start off, this is not a bad walk getting started here for him. He's got a long way to go, but this is certainly improving as you're going. The big thing is we need you to get the slack out of the rein. So you see how you have this big loop in the rein? Well, that makes it just like when you're riding. If you ride with a totally loose rein, it's very hard to control the horse, and that's kind of what's happening here. So you want to try to get a little closer to the horse when you walk, when you're doing this walk work. Walk with him. Keep the slack out of the line, much as you're doing there, but then ask for a much more active walk, because this simply is the right start, but we need to get him to stretch even deeper. And the question was about riding. Because of the way this horse is going when you ride, and we'll get to that at the end of the video, this is not a horse that you'd want to be riding yet. You really want to just work on this lunge work until we get this horse much stronger over its back and beginning to do something that is to work correctly. So once again, what we want to do is just get closer to the horse so that you can send it on around and ask it to be a little more active. Once again, the reason that its gaits are so flat is just simply not working through its back at all, and we need to get the horse much more active in order to get that to happen. So working closer to it on the line, keeping the slack out of the line, and asking once again for it to be more active. You might want to practice running that whip out a few times, just trying to tap him a little bit every now and then. And once again, that's part of the skill of working with a lunge whip, is you have to be able to use the whip accurately, that is to touch the horse with it when you need to. It does very little good to crack a whip at a horse, because all they do is simply learn that the crack doesn't mean anything very shortly, and they'll stop moving. But we can see, taking a look at this horse, you can see how sagged his back is. We can see his belly is quite distended. So this is a horse that's just never developed at all in his life, and once again, that's why you have such flat gaits out of him. The same thing here. I'd just like to see you get closer to the horse taking that slack out of the line, or you can try to encourage a more active walk. And the same situation we see here in the trot. As soon as he starts trotting, you're just too far away to really achieve much. And you see how he's pulling his shoulders to the outside, comes around the corner. You can clearly see the horse is on two different circles. His forehand is being pulled way outside the circle of the front leg. And this gets back to that work in hand that you were kind of trying to do in the very beginning of this, but doing it sort of backwards in the sense that you were trying to get the horse to move around the hindquarters than to move around the front end, which is more what we want in the beginning. Now that was a little better as he got a little more active there. But you can just see, even watching this horse's trot, you can see how there's just no thrust off the ground at all. It's very flat-footed. He's extremely hollow and ewe-necked. So when you see the neck, the bottom side of the neck engaged the way you see this horse's, it tells you basically the horse is just sort of shuffling along by pulling itself along with its shoulders. It's not really using its back end as part of its propulsion system. And that's true of any ewe-necked horse that you see. You can kind of see how the front legs kind of stab the ground, and you can see how he's pulling back with the shoulders as he moves himself with the front legs. And whereas the back end is just kind of floating along there. It's not really doing anything. There's absolutely no thrust. The back end is really not propelling the horse forward at all. But it will if you keep up this work. So same thing here. I'd just like to see you get closer. See how much slack you have in the line. And that's what allows the horse to pull its shoulders way outside the line of the circle. So you also asked a little bit, she said this horse nips at her a little bit when she's working close to it and that sort of thing. Know that all that will disappear by virtue of the lunging work is the best way to get this horse doing that. And through the lunging, we get the horse to submit a little bit to us, just like it would to another horse in a herd. If you've ever seen horses work each other in the herd, the alpha horse will come up and nip them right in that fleshy area of the buttocks and get them to move where they want them to move. And that's exactly what you have to do. That's why in the beginning of training, it's all based on getting the horse to move forward, not to stop. We do very little stopping with a young horse. I usually only stop a young horse once at the end of its session, and then they're rarely happy to stop by then. So it's not a fight. Whereas most people train the other way around. As soon as they get on a horse, a young horse, the first thing they're worried about is, pulling it up fast and making it halt fast. And this makes the horse not want to halt fast. And with a young horse, especially if you have one of blood, now it's different with a horse that might be, quite a bit duller. But generally speaking, horses that are a little of the hot nature, they're just going to fight with you if you try to fight them about stopping too soon. Though once again, that isn't something that you'd have to worry about with this one. So it will be great to see this horse getting over his back. Once again, you see how he comes around the corner there. You see how far the shoulders are pulled out of the line with the hindquarters. And that's why he's not engaging, because he's avoiding that engagement by just throwing his shoulders to the outside. So that means you have to have a little more contact and hold yourself more steady in your position and make the horse move around you until you can get the hindquarters to move out away from you. Once again, go back and look at that, our videos on work in hand, and see if you can't work. That will help this horse a great deal, but you need to be doing it correctly for that to happen, which means you have to be working in a way that the horse can maintain the rhythm, which is what was wrong with what you were doing before. You were asking in such a difficult way for the horse to do it that it was impossible for him to do it, and therefore what you were doing had no rhythm, which of course means the horse is not working over its back. So also a very dangerous thing you did there to drop that line. You're now standing on top of it. If this horse spooked at something, those lines would be around your legs. And you never want to drop the whip on the ground when you're working with horses. You want to turn it around, just put it under your arm as you walk towards the horse, and always wrap the line up as you approach the horse. What you're doing there, once again, it's easy to get lulled into a state of not paying much attention with horses like this because you think they're really calm. But once again, you can never count on the horse not spooking, any horse, because something can go wrong. A plane could crash in the background. One of those trees could fall down. You just never know what it's going to be. And if you had been standing on top of that line the way you were doing a few moments ago, you would have found yourself off of your feet, and hopefully not, but perhaps with the line wrapped around your leg and taking a trip around the ring that you didn't want to make. So slack out of the line like that where you have them there, and now you're working closer to the horse. So this is better where you are here, but once again, you see how the shoulders are pulled outside. So you must work actively to make the horse move its hindquarters to the outside. We have to have that before we can worry about anything else. So until I worry about whether the horse is walking, trotting, canting, whatever it's doing, I have to focus on this idea of making the horse move out into the outside rein. It's just what we do when we ride. So when we're lunging, it's just riding from the ground. You should be doing a leg yield here, asking the horse to move out and move those hindquarters away. And just by moving the hindquarters out in the same circle, even if you're not doing a shoulder in, it will engage that inside hind leg much more than what you're doing here. Because what you see here, once again, you see how he's really just walking on straight lines with his shoulders pulled way outside the circle that you're performing. So you're missing a lot of opportunities to get him working a little more actively. And having seen this horse go, no, this horse doesn't have any kind of special gaits. And even all those kind of horses like Missouri fox trotters and some Tennessee walkers that have a natural kind of little shuffly gait, that will all go away if you train them correctly. They're all just horses, and you can train them to move correctly. It's just that some horses have been bred, it makes it easier for people to ride them badly. For instance, like a saddlebred is very long in the back. It has a very high neck that comes up out of the shoulders. So it's very easy to hollow that horse and make it do all kinds of strange things. Once again, remember these gaited horses, you know, these artificial gaits, you create them by hollowing the back of the horse. That's how you disengage the front and back end. That's how you're able to create some of these strange gaits that people come up with, which really have nothing to do with nature. So remember that dressage is basically all about perfecting the horse's 3 natural gaits without trying to add any others that would be unnecessary and detrimental to the horse. So just remember that everything you do with a horse hollow is detrimental to the overall health of the horse in many ways. If it's not over its back, the horse is not working enough to take the concussion of movement into the soft tissue rather than hard tissue of the joints. That being the #1 issue. It's just like driving a car with no shocks on. It's going to fall apart pretty soon if you keep doing that because it's going to rattle apart. Well, the same thing is true of a horse that's not over its back. So you see how this trot really this isn't really a trot. This is really just a jog you're doing. So once again, you need to get that line much closer to you. You need to get him closer to you by shortening the line and just make him much more active. Don't worry about anything, but just even if he canters a little bit and breaks the gait a little bit, you've just got to get him to answer to the whip and move out away from you and just get more active before anything's going to happen because he's just not swinging enough now. You have a sham bone on him, but you know, because he's not engaging and not moving, it's not really doing anything because he isn't moving enough to make a difference. That is, he's not starting to swing underneath and push up through the back. Though this is improving a little bit as you're going here, but it has quite a ways to go. And I think if you'll improve these things that I'm talking about, you'll find this will start happening much sooner. But we couldn't even expect him to do anything, to work correctly over his back at the pace at which you're moving him here, because it's just so entirely slow that he's really not even beginning to use his back. So in the beginning, even if it's a little uncomfortable for the horse and it seems a little bit like he's out of balance, you've just got to get him to respond to that whip first and start moving. Once again, I'm not advocating that you whip the horse severely. I'm just advocating that you get close enough to him that you can touch him and you begin to ask for more. So I wouldn't worry about how much you're asking until he starts breaking to the canter. And even when he does that, you just bring him right back. It's very in the nature of most horses to, you know, they'd rather give you a lazy canter than a good trot. And when they do that, the best thing to do is just to send them on in the canter a little bit so they get the idea that this isn't an escape from anything. So in other words, don't let them do a lazy canter even if they break into a canter, but send them on in the canter for a few minutes and make them work a little harder and then come back to the trot and you'll see that it's improved. Now the walk work here, once that we're mounted, the walk work is not too bad here walking along, and certainly if you're going to ride this horse at this level, the walk should be the only place you should do it. And that's perfectly fine as you get him to stretch. If you can't keep the horse over its back, which you can't in the trot at this level with the horse, he's not even working over his back on the lunge line. So when you add the weight of a rider up there, it's only going to get worse. So once again, we don't want to ride a horse until it looks like something that we'd like to ride and it's working well over its back. If it's not strong enough to get over its back without you up there, it's certainly not going to be strong enough to do it with you up there. Your position looks quite good here. You're stretched up straight, and that's what I like to see, just stretching up, carrying your weight. your own weight that is. It's important that the riders always understand that it takes strength to ride a horse, but not strength against the horse. It takes strength to hold yourself in the right position so that your body weight is interfering as little as possible with the movement of the horse. So everything looks good with that. He's actually starting to stretch pretty good here. This is actually a better walk than what you got on the lunge line by virtue of the fact that, hey, you're closer to him, aren't you, because you're on his back. But he's much too hollow to do anything other than the walk. So we should keep it to that until this horse starts moving much better on the lunge line. And even when you're up there, now once again, this is a better walk than you had on the lunge line because you're asking for more, but you can even still ask him for much, much more and just more activity. Just what you're doing, not taking a great deal of contact with the bridle, but just keeping the slack out of the reins. That's all. Remember, we're never trying to force the horse into a position. Much better walk here. So that walk was not too bad, though it still has a long way to go. But once again, when we get to the trot here, this is pretty much a waste of time because once again, you can see how hollow he is. You're having to post against the stirrup to get out of the stirrup. Look at how U-necked he is. Once again, look at the muscle on the underside of the neck. So that shows me, you can now see it once you look closely. You'll see this horse is just stabbing his front legs and he's just pulling you along by his front legs. The back legs aren't doing anything at all. And that's, of course, why it feels comfortable for you to sit to because the horse isn't really moving. Now, sadly, we see the same thing being done to very expensive, very good moving horses because we see way too many beginner riders. I'll call them beginners for the most part because they are, and, yet they're riding at the FEI levels. But they're basically taking very expensive horses and making them move like this one. Now, the very expensive ones with a lot of movement still have some movement left. That is, they look like they're doing more because they're built so much better and they have all this activity in their hocks, but they're really not doing any more than this horse is doing. Once again, you can see how hollow he is there, how you just have to post against your stirrup. So that's really not a good enough trot to really bother with yet that it's going to do him any good. And that's the basic rule of thumb that we want to move forward. We don't want to do things with horses that are going to create more problems down the road that we're going to have to undo. So if we just keep this idea in mind that we're only doing what we can do, keeping the horse over its back, and if it's not over its back, everything we have to do with the horse should be aimed at getting it over its back until it is. Then we can make logical steps forward in the work that we're doing. Like how you're just widening your hands there to take up the slack. That's exactly right, and just the technique that you want to use with this. Now, once again, the walk is rather slow here. We'd like to just ask him to be much more active. And he does get to the point where the walk is not too bad. It's coming a little bit better there, but just know that it has a great deal to go. But I don't see anything wrong with this horse or anything special about his gaits. It's just an undeveloped horse. Look behind the saddle and you see how much there's a dip behind the saddle. If this were to continue like this is what ultimately leads to kissing spine when the back drops away so much that the top of the vertebrae on the back begin to rub together and can create a great deal of soreness and can also basically ruin the horse for riding for life. Once again, why it's so important. So when you go to shows, once again, and you see upper level horses whose back looks just like this one, you know there's something very wrong with this process. And unfortunately, the USDF and the FEI have not done enough to stop these horses moving up through the ranks, being passed from level to level, without actually fulfilling the basic foundation. It's kind of like all the kids when I was in high school. They basically let kids pass through high school if you could just, sit in this chair long enough, they'd give you a high school diploma. Well, all these kids graduated, they couldn't read or write, and they basically were not, had not been developed enough to be useful parts of society. Well, that same thing is with horses. If you never develop them correctly, it's hard for them to become useful citizens. And ones that are going to be fun and companions for us and actually get into the work. That's when it really becomes fun, when you have a horse that you've done this enough with, when they really start trying for you. And if everything we do is aimed at getting them more comfortable in the work that they do, they're going to try a lot harder for us in everything that we do. Because this will become their fun and their playtime, and they get to come out and relax and work, and they feel good about that. I mean, horses do want to move. This is why we see when you take a horse out of that's been in a stall, you turn them loose, they run around like lunatics. Now, we don't want that to happen. That's why we have to keep it under control, because they'll hurt themselves. We see so many horses that have been injured for life because someone has taken them and turned them out and run them like a lunatic in a big ring till they fall down or run through the fence. I've seen every kind of accident you can possibly imagine with that, and so many horses whose careers were just shortened unnecessarily by being run around like lunatics in rings. People have a false idea. They see horses running around, you know, like lunatics with their tails up in the air and they're nickering. They think the horse is having fun. That's not a horse that's having fun at all. That's a horse that's in a panic because it's been separated from its friends that it lives with. And once again, when you are an animal that is preyed upon, when you're cut out from the rest of the herd, in your mind, you know, you're very vulnerable. And that's why horses become so freaked out and they start calling for their buddies, because in their mind, they've been separated out from the herd. So once again, if you're turning your horses out, they should never be running around like lunatics. If you are, you should bring them in or only turn them out someplace that's closer to where their friends live, and something small enough that they can't just run around like lunatics. Now, however, pacing can be even just as bad, like pacing back and forth in front of a gate. When you see horses doing that, they can destroy their legs doing that. So if a horse out in a turnout is doing anything but just relaxing and walking around eating, then that's not what you want them to be doing. Looking at the trot here once more, we see the same thing. You see how ewe-neck the horse is. He's really just pulling with the shoulders. So there's really not enough horse here to get anything worthwhile out of this horse at the trot when you are mounted. So we need to just go back to the work on the lunge line. And this was a question that she asked me about this, and that's my answer is, yes, this horse is not developed enough to do much riding. I would ride this horse only in the walk, and I wouldn't even do that every day yet until you see this horse getting stronger and really stretching much, much deeper. But there's nothing wrong with this horse, and it can get there. Believe me, I've worked many that are much more difficult than this one and much hollower and with much more swayed back than this one is starting with. So just know that you'll get there if you're willing to keep putting the time in. If you improve those things I talked about in the lunge line, that's the main point. You got to get that right. When you get that right and the horse really stretching into the contact, you'll see that all your other problems will disappear. But you're certainly on the right track. Keep it up. Try to get the horse more active in that lunge line. Keep trying to push the hindquarters away from you on the lunge line. So hold the horse on a little smaller circle at first, and then push the hindquarters away from you by tapping it on the hindquarters with the whip there, asking it to move out a little bit. And once we get the horse stretching all the way down, then you'd want to start riding. And that's my rule of thumb. I just don't get on a horse till I have it completely working over its back. Now this horse, your walk work was not too bad there, and you can certainly do a little bit of that. But for me, how I go about things, I wouldn't ride a horse at all until I get it over its back so it's strong enough to pick me up and carry me, so my weight isn't pushing the back even further down. So great work today. This is going to be a really interesting horse to watch develop. You've done a good job of getting it started, so stay off its back, go back to the lunging, get it more active, push the hindquarters away, and you'll be there. This is Will Faerber from Art to Ride. See you next time.